Well, Daniel chapter number 1 is where we're going to be. And I debated on whether or not I would just go, because Mike has been going through the book of Genesis, on whether or not I would just kind of prepare for the book of Genesis. But honestly, the chapter he was going to be on had a bunch of big words in it and people's names and, so I'll just leave that for him. I don't want to steal his thunder. Because he was practicing the names, watching them, listening to, the Bible on audio to make sure he's getting the pronunciations right and all that. So I want to make sure he gets able to do that. But the book of Daniel, Daniel chapter 1 is where we're going to start. And, Daniel is one of those characters from the Bible, one of those people in the Bible that we've heard stories our entire life from, right? And when you think of Daniel, you think of the lion's den, right? You also think of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and the fiery furnace and his willingness to step out and to pray and, in front of the window, even though he knew that it could get him in trouble and how that he followed the Lord. And he's a great character and he's a great example to us. But as you get older, and as you, learn more about the story and the world around him at that time, it's a very interesting story, and it's very applicable, I think, to where we are in society, and it can apply to everybody. He was a great man of God who followed the Lord. I didn't go, it's been a while since I've studied it in depth, but he was in some sort of government capacity for like 70 some years throughout, several different kingdoms and several different kings. Back in that day especially, just not a huge common occurrence, right? Kingdoms seemed to turn everything over because they didn't want anybody to be loyal to the last guy. So Daniel was able to be a part of the society that he lived in for a long time under several different circumstances, several different kings, several different kingdoms, like I said. And over the course of I think it was 75 years or something that he was able to do that. As we start out here, we see a very young Daniel. We don't know exactly how old he was. He was probably a young teenager. And he was an Israelite. He lived in Jerusalem. And so we'll read the whole first chapter here of Daniel, and then we'll kind of talk about things as we go through. So Daniel chapter 1, verse 1. In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem, and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God. And he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God. And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of the eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the Jews of Israel, and of the king's seed, and of the princes, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored and skillful in all wisdom and cunning in knowledge and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them for 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. Now among these were of the children of Judah Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, unto whom the princes of the eunuchs gave names. For he gave unto Daniel the name Belteshazzar, kind of a long name there, and to Hananiah of Shadrach, and to Mishael of Meshach, and to Azariah of Abednego. But Daniel purposed in his heart. That's a very key verse for me for the whole book of Daniel, but especially for this passage. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. And the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who hath appointed your meat and your drink. For why should he see your face worse liking than the children which are of your sort? Then shall ye make me endanger my head to the king. Then said Daniel to Melzar, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, prove thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat and the water to drink. Then let our countenances be looked upon before thee, and the countenance of your children that eat of the portion of the king's meat. And as thou seest, deal with thy servants. So he consented to them in this matter, and proved them for 10 days. And at the end of the 10 days, their countenances appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children which did eat of the portion of the king's meat. Thus Melzar took away the portion of their meat, and the wine that they should drink, and gave them pulse. As for these 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom. And Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. Now at the end of the days that the king had said he should bring them in, then the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king communed with them. And among them all was found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore stood they before the king, and in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in all his realm. And Daniel continued even unto the first year of King Cyrus. So we see the beginning parts here of Daniel. We see the opening chapter here, setting a baseline for who Daniel was, where Daniel was, kind of the circumstances of his life that he had going on. So Daniel was a young kid. He was probably, like I said, a teenager at some age, probably around 15 is what they guess. And he was in the 3rd year of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, who was a good king. He made mistakes, but he was a godly king. But he'd had several issues. And Nebuchadnezzar came and took over Judah and took over Jerusalem then, and they besieged it. So they took, of the people that they besieged, they took the youngest, the smartest, the brightest, the ones that were royalty of some sort, the people that were, the most educated, the fairer. So they come into Jerusalem, they kill Daniel's family and friends for all intents and purposes, right? And they take Daniel captured. And his Hananiah, Azariah, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That's what we remember him as, right? Which is kind of funny that we remember Daniel by his Jewish name, but the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego we remember by his Babylonian names. But at any rate, these 4 guys, their entire world had been totally turned upside down. They went from being important people in Jerusalem, educated, taken care of, the best looking, the just best dressed, the smartest, most intelligent people in the country, and they're being carted off to another land. They saw their entire world just totally changed on that moment. And I can't imagine how difficult that had to be for them. How hard it would be to survive, let alone to thrive in the way that they would, and as we see throughout the book of Daniel that they continue to do. It just really lets you know that no matter how good we think we have it, you just never know what's going to happen. And in that moment, I'm sure that these guys probably felt like the Lord had left them, right? That the Lord was just sending them into some kind of chaotic world that they didn't know how to respond to. And so it's very difficult for them. And the king had given this master of the eunuchs instruction to bring these children to Babylon. And for 3 years, he wanted to fatten them up, basically, make them healthier. right? This is similar to the story of Esther, right? When he brought in all these different wives that he was going to try out and see if who was going to be the next queen. He put them through this whole beauty regime before they were able to see him. Well, same thing here. Nebuchadnezzar said, feed these guys the best food, the best wine. Keep on teaching them teach them our native tongue. Keep on teaching them in the ways of the sciences, all the best, things that we have going on educationally. Give them everything that they need. And in 3 years, hopefully they'll be good enough that they can stand before me and, talk to me. And so they had these instructions. And so these were well favored, skilled in knowledge, understanding science, all that kind of stuff. And so he gave them that for 3 years. And then we get down there and we see in verse 7 how that Daniel and Hananiah and Mishael and Azariah all have their names changed. Now, in their Jewish names, they all have pertinence to the true God, right? And to the God that they worshiped. And then their new names that Nebuchadnezzar and them had given to them represented the gods, the little g gods of their country. So he's trying to change them, right? This is during this 3-year period, you have to imagine there was a little bit of attempt at brainwashing to some degree, right? Because as a king, you want to take over your lands, but you still have to have the people live there, right? So the people that live there, you want them to be loyal to you. You want them to understand that you are in charge now. But there's still a little bit of animosity, I'm sure. Daniel and his friends and everybody that was carted off, they probably still had some feelings towards Nebuchadnezzar, right? In order to be taken over like that. So for 3 years, he's trying to teach them his way and trying to get them to, ignore where they had come from. And it appears, we don't have any names and, it's not told to us, but it appears like some of these people did, right? Some of these people just went ahead and started eating, whatever, ignoring their wishes of God and abandoning their Jewish heritage and their religion and just doing whatever they're told to do, right, out of fear. But the interesting thing there in verse number 8 is that Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself. This is a young kid going through a horribly traumatic experience. But he purposed in his heart that he wasn't going to defile God. And I think as Christians, it's important that we purpose in our heart. Obviously, the younger that you purpose in your heart, the better off you're going to be, right? But as you progress through different, sections of life and different, things going on, you can have new purposes in your heart, right? As a young child, your purpose in your heart to follow God is going to look different than as an older person purposing in your heart to follow God. But the key is that you purpose it in your heart. You make that decision before you have to make it. Oftentimes we fall into sin because we're just kind of skating that line, right? We're allowing ourselves to get closer, and we're just continually making, okay, well, maybe just a little bit more. But if you purpose in your heart, you're not going to keep getting closer. Make the decision before you have to make the decision on whatever that is, whatever that looks like in your life. As a younger child, like I said, it could be something simple like I'm going to purpose in my heart that I'm going to read my Bible every day. And that can be the same thing as you continue through your life, right? Prayer, another thing. Making the decision before you sit down and you go, I'm too tired today. As you become a parent, purpose in your heart that your child is going to be exposed to the things of God. Make that decision before it ever comes down to the choice between, sports or church. As you get into grandparents, same thing, purposing in your heart that you're going to make sure that your grandchildren experience the things of the Lord. That they understand that coming together, assembling ourselves together with like believers is important. That they understand that having a relationship with the Lord is important. Prayer, Bible reading, all of these things. And as you get older, continuing to purpose in your heart. Daniel purposed in his heart at a young age here. And as you go through the entire book of Daniel and you continue to see Daniel's experiences, it didn't change. He purposed in his heart. He'd already made these decisions. I don't care what society throws at me. I don't care what society says the truth is, or their truth, or other people's truth. I don't care what happens. I've already made the decision in my life that I'm going to do what God says. I'm not going to defile myself with the king's meat. I don't care how awesome the king is. I don't care how great his meat is. And I bet you he had the best steaks. I bet you he had the best pulled pork. Unfortunately, they had the laws back then that they couldn't enjoy the pulled pork like we can today. But Daniel and his friends, they purposed in their heart that they weren't going to be defiled by what was going on in society around them. I don't care what they say. I don't care what they think. You see that throughout the book. In Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace, you see that. What do they say to the king? King, I don't know if I'm going to be saved or not. God can save me. But it doesn't matter if he saves me by not letting me get burned up, or he saves me by taking me to... I'm not going to bow down to you. I have already purposed in my heart who God is. I've already purposed in my heart that I'm going to follow him. Doesn't matter what society says. Doesn't matter what kind of pressure society puts on me. And you think there wasn't pressure? There was pressure, right? Everybody that was smart and educated, they start for 3 years. They ate the king's meat, and they drank the king's wine. 4 people didn't. Of the whole group, I don't know how many there were, probably hundreds, I would guess, out of a whole country. 4 people said, I'm not going to do it. Just give me the pulse. Give me the fruits and the vegetables. And I guarantee you that in 10 days, just do it as a trial period. Because that's what Daniel said. I'm not going to defile myself with the king's meat. And the king of the eunuchs said, now wait a minute. Head of the eunuchs, he said, I understand where you're coming from. And I like you. We're friendly. That's great. But you know who gets their head cut off if you don't look good in 3 years? If I take you to the king, and there's 4 of you that are pale and skinny and sickly, and everyone else looks good, I'm going to get blamed for you 4 because I gave you the veggie diet. He said, I don't think it's a good idea. And they said, nope, give us a shot. 4 days or 10 days. 10 days, us 4. We'll eat nothing but drink water and eat fruits and vegetables. And I guarantee at the end of that 10 days, God will honor that. And what did it do? God honored it. For 10 days, they ate their normal meals. They didn't eat the king's meat. They didn't drink the king's wine. They did what the Lord would have for them to do. And at the end of that 10 days, he was astonished. 10 days is pretty quick, right? I would say in the matter of 10 days, you wouldn't be able to tell the average person whether they were more healthy or less healthy, no matter what they ate. Maybe if they didn't eat anything for 10 days, you'd be able to see it. But if you were eating anything for 10 days, this is a miraculous thing. This is God's provision on their life. This was God saying, you're doing well by following my commandments, by doing what you're supposed to do. God blesses preparation. I wrote this. I don't know who said it. Someone said it, probably preaching on this. But God blesses preparation and Satan plays in procrastination. Because I'm not smart enough to come up with that. But God blesses preparation. When we prepare, God blesses that. When we make a purpose in our heart, God blesses that. But when we don't have a plan, when we don't make a decision and it comes down to crunch time, that's where we can make the biggest mistakes in our lives. right? When we don't have a plan, even if it's not a tactical plan that's all consistently laid out, an idea in our mind of a path that we're going to follow, the Lord in this case, as opposed to not the Lord, right? We need to make sure that we are purposing in our heart to follow the Lord. And then, as I said, the 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skill and all learning and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. So that was a gift that Daniel had, right? He was able to understand visions and dreams. And as as you go throughout the rest of the book of Daniel, you can see that he's able to interpret to Nebuchadnezzar his dreams and tell him what his visions mean. And it really saves him a couple times. The one time, and I think it's in chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar not only didn't know the interpretation of his dream, but he didn't even remember the dream. And Daniel was able to say, well, this is what you dreamt, and this is what your dream means. And had he not been able to do that, him and all the other smart people in the country would have got killed that day. Because Nebuchadnezzar was an angry man. And we see throughout Nebuchadnezzar's life rash reactions, right? In that situation, he was going to kill everybody because they couldn't tell him what his dream was and how to interpret it. And then Daniel's able to do it. So then he goes the other direction and goes, well, now I'm going to kill anybody that says anything against Daniel's God. He still didn't get it, right? And then as we see throughout Nebuchadnezzar's life, we see ultimately in chapter 5, I think it is, we see where Nebuchadnezzar, it might be chapter 4. Probably doesn't matter for the purpose of this conversation, but where we see where Nebuchadnezzar finally does get it. God finally gets to Nebuchadnezzar. Now he has to turn into a wild animal and live in the fields for 7 years in order to finally get it. But we see that we see that Daniel is able to, throughout his life, put himself in positions where he is a bright and shining light in a society that has no appreciation for God or the things of God. And we very much live in a society where very few people care about the things of God. And we, like Daniel, can be that shining light. But the first thing you have to do is decide that's what you want to do. You have to purpose in your heart that you're not going to defile yourself with the things of this world. Daniel very much could have just, he became, as you see throughout, he becomes a powerful guy 2 or 3 times in 2 or 3 different kingdoms. Okay, I'm going to make you second in command. I'm going to make you third in command. You're going to be important. Everyone's going to come to you. And then we see, after, leading up to being put into the lion's den, even in the next kingdom, Daniel's a very sought-after, important person that people are jealous of. But because he continued to follow God through every step of his life, and he continued to do the things of God, despite the chaos that was happening around him, despite the most powerful man in the world telling him what to do against what God was saying, he didn't relinquish that. He didn't back down. He purposed in his heart that he was going to follow God. So for us today, it's pretty easy, right? It's easy to understand. It's not always easy to do, right? Because we have a lot of pressure. Society wants us to change our ways. Society puts that pressure on us to not say certain things, and you got to be very careful about the words that you use, or you could get canceled, or someone could, make fun of you, yell at you, abuse you. We have to be very careful. But purpose in your heart to do what God would have you to do, no matter what the pressures of the people around you say. All right. With that, I will go ahead and dismiss in prayer, and we can have an early snack church. Dear and Father, Lord, I thank you for this day. I thank you for Daniel. I thank you for the example that he is for us. And that even as a young man that was in a very horrible situation of his life totally getting turned upside down, everything in his world getting changed, the people that he knew and loved being killed or sent away or at the very least persecuted in a real way, that he still knew that he had to follow you, that he knew that you were in command and that you were the God of this world, Lord, and that he knew that by following you, he would be in relationship with you, which is what we all seek, Lord, right? A never-ending, everlasting relationship with you, Lord. Just pray that we would also purpose in our heart to follow you and to do what you would have for us to do, no matter what kind of circumstances this society and the world that we live in would throw at us, that we would put you first and follow you, Lord. We love you. We thank you. We ask all these things in your name. Amen.